remember. So.
Oh, okay. So I didn't know if you were going to play the music, but I just couldn't hear it. Okay. So here we go. Hello and welcome once again to Super Connectivity. I'm your host, Charlie, the Professor Esser, and with me, as always, is the bashful blue-eyed bomber of Pittsburgh.
Phil, me, and Perich.
And tonight, we're treating once again our very special guest star, David F. Walker.
Yay!
Sorry, I've been practicing my Kermit the Frog. Oh, David!
That was good.
Thank you. I am so happy to have you back.
It's good to be back.
100 episodes later.
100 episodes later. Sorry.
I was going to say that feels. It's actually. I'm honored. I should say that it's 100 episodes later. It's But yeah, that's just. I feel like you could have found someone more important than me, but I'm not going to complain.
Well, okay. You know what? You can be as humble as you want to be. But let's. We're talking to David F. Walker, writer, producer, filmmaker extraordinaire, and actual comic book publisher as well. With your new work coming out, I hope soon. One Fall through Solid Comics.
Yeah, yep. The first comic book publishing. Wow, that's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, and I thought it was going to be difficult. And so it's funny because the first issue of One Fall is out, but if you didn't back it on Kickstarter, it's like finding a Sasquatch. It's really hard to find. And in fact, I'm meeting with some guys over the weekend to try to resolve that problem. And it's a work in progress. And I think that when you're an indie creator, hopefully people cut you a little bit of slack. So we'll see.
Well, you said you were saying, but you didn't know how difficult it was. Or there's just like a lot of hoops you have to jump through, especially with distribution, like Diamond and everything.
Well, I'm not going through Diamond, and I made a conscious decision not to do that right now. Mm-hmm. Later on down the road, maybe we can, but I knew with the way the industry is set up and the way retailers, the limited amount of space that retailers have, they're just not buying that many indie comics, especially once you go down the tier. You start at Image, and then you go down to, say, a Boom or a Dynamite, then you get into Aftershock and TKO and Ahoy, and there's some great publishers putting out great books, and there's some great retailers out there, but the retailers only have a limited amount of space. And so the philosophy that I had, and it's a philosophy that a lot of other creators and indie publishers have, is that, well, rather than fighting for that valuable space on the shelf at the retailers, we have to go out and we have to find our audience ourselves. That's what platforms like Kickstarter provide. And if you're more on top of your game than I am, you have a store set up on your website, and you've got those books with you at conventions and things like that. And so for me, the hardest part has been that I have a project that I'm working on. It's a very big nonfiction project that has taken up all of my free time. And then it's taken up all of my work time. And then it's taken up all my everything that you could possibly imagine. It is sucked it dry. It's like a black hole, except instead of light not being able to escape, free time cannot escape from this black hole. And so I kind of got stuck, and so I haven't been able to give Solid Comics the attention it needs. And rather than scrambling to get it all set up in a short-term sense, I'm actually planning things out better so that I never get into this sort of situation again, where if a really big assignment comes my way, suddenly I have to drop everything.
And that's great, because honestly, I am starved for David Walker content. I'll be honest with you. I do. I get Bitterroot every month. I get Naomi every month, and I'm happy to see Discombobulated is coming back in December.
Yep.
really was actually a fan of your original run of that web comic, and I'm glad to see. And of course, again, planning ahead, you're stockpiling now, so that come December you're going to be able to release them without having it be a major distraction to you. And I like what you wrote about that, which is basically that, yes, it's something that doesn't make money, but it's something that makes me happy.
Yep.
And yes.
No, go on.
Well, I was going to say, how hard is it to find things that truly make you happy as an artist?
I would say very. For me, it feels again like it's like being a Bigfoot hunter. It's you're lucky if you smell it from a mile away, but you don't always see the Bigfoot. So, for me, it's one of the recurring themes in my life is I'm very bad with time management, and it has bitten me in the butt really hard the last 3-4 months, and as a result, and I go through this cycle all the time. So you would think I would learn from my mistakes, and it's happening again. And Bitterroot, we're working on the second arc right now, and that's behind schedule, and that is 100% my fault. It's not the fault of Chuck or Sanford. It's my fault. Naomi is not behind schedule, but that's on hiatus. And then Discombobulated, at the time when I took a break from doing it, I honestly said to myself, okay, you're just going to take like 2-3 months off tops. And a couple of days ago, I realized, oh, it's been a year, and I'm working. I've been planning on expanding it for a long time, and then I realized, wow, it's like a year is too long, and then rather than jumping right back in and relaunching the strip, say in 2 weeks, which I could do, but then what would happen is every week I would be creating a new strip, and whereas if I took, say, 2 or 3 weeks, I could create 20 or 30 and then just stockpile them. And so that's what I decided to do.
That is awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to so much of your work.
Can I ask a question? I mean, I don't know if it's a trade secret, but like, do you use like a certain type of software to create those strips?
Well, what I did is I hired an artist, and she created a limited number of images that I treat them almost like clip art. And then from there, so I have probably about 15 different pieces. Actually, it's more than that, because there's probably at least 9 or 10 of the main character, and then there's the supporting characters. And then I just use a combination of Illustrator and Photoshop to put the strips together. It's a very basic strip right now. It's very talking heads. And so I've been using Illustrator to letter it, and then compiling everything in Photoshop. I'm sure there's probably an easier way, but I would have to learn how to do that. So I go with what I know. And one of the things that had happened when I'd taken that initial hiatus last year was I had decided that I wanted to expand the scope of the sort of stories that I could tell. And then I knew I was going to need a new batch of art, a new batch of assets. And so I talked to the artist, and she was like, yeah, let's do it. And then I just kept flaking. And then she had some stuff come up in her life professionally, so she wasn't able to work on it. And then I saw her I guess it's been about a month ago. I saw her at San Diego Comic-Con. We got together, and she said, hey, if you want to get back into doing that discombobulated stuff you talked about, I've got some free time coming up. And so that was what lit the fire. And then and one of the things that her and I had talked about, her name's DJ Parnell. She wanted to build up some work samples for her portfolio, some panel to panel, more traditional comic book storytelling stuff. So I had said, well, how about if I write a short story and you can draw that? And she was like, sure. And I spent some time obsessing over what should that short story be. And then I realized, I could write a discombobulated story that really breaks out of the talking head mode and has action and all kinds of stuff like that. So we're also going to do that. And that story won't be out until sometime next year. but the regular strips will launch in December, and I'll start working on putting those together next month.
Okay, I'm really looking forward to it. That's great. Now, and of course, and maybe this is just IMDb, because I did go through your IMDb yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah, and I did notice that you are listed as the producer on Bitterroot. I had heard that the rights to Bitterroot had recently been sold to, I believe it's Legendary.
Yep.
Yeah. So, are you officially a producer on that project?
I guess so. If IMDb says it.
Okay. Well, there you go.
The internet never lies.
Sanford, Chuck, and I, we have optioned Bitterroot to Legendary. They optioned the film rights. They have within those rights, they also have the rights to, if they want to, either shift gears and do a TV show or do a TV show in conjunction with the film. And part of the agreement that we have, it attaches us as probably as executive producers as opposed to producers. I'm sure that there's some fine print within the contract that delineates the difference between producer, executive producer. But we're attached, but it's not very hands-on, and I kind of prefer it that way. Once a month or so, we'll get some emails with some updates about directors that they're thinking about and writers that they're thinking about, and even though I have a bit of experience in film, like, this is so far out of my wheelhouse, and I don't want to be that guy who blows it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Who says really dumb things to the people who are making a lot more money than I am in Hollywood, and then messes up his own opportunities. But I've had a couple really good meetings in person with the folks at Legendary and down at San Diego at Comic-Con and back in July. We all sat down and met with them. So it's been a really good relationship. They've been really, really hands-on in terms of, earlier this summer we put out a special edition, the summer special, the Red Summer Special. And, we sent them the scripts to that beforehand, and we sent them the pencils. So they, other than the actual Bitterroot team that put the book together, Legendary, those were the only people that saw what we were doing. And we've been talking to them a little bit about where the second arc is going. And, and I even sat down with them at one point and said, just so you know, I'm not, I can't speak for Chuck or Sanford. I said, I'm not one of those people who is going to be like, you absolutely have to do it this way. I said, I think that there are characters in this comic that lend themselves more to being the lead of a film. And I think a film would be more interesting if we focused on maybe these two characters over here as opposed to all 5 or 6 of the family, which sometimes can be a problem. It's, those teen movies, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And so that's, but they've been really good conversations.
My one word of advice is don't lose Berg. I love Berg.
Everybody loves Berg.
Berg,
I don't think we would lose any of the I don't think there's any reason to lose any of the family members, but I do think that I have always, as a writer, I've always struggled with writing too many characters in a book. It's very easy to bring a lot of characters into your series, but it can be very difficult to find time for all of them. And a film is that way, can be that way too. It's you look at, it's sort of interesting how, if you look at a film franchise like, say, the X-Men, right? Mm-hmm. The X-Men did it well when they launched with those first 2 movies back in the early 2000s. But like, you look at the Avengers and you had to build towards that. And I think that when you look at Justice League didn't build towards that.
No.
And that's what you kind of got. You got a film that was really difficult to find your focus. Who is your main character? Why am I supposed to root for them? Who has the interesting arc in Justice League? And that's the thing, you know, and it's not to blast that movie, it's not to put it on blast, but you know, and I don't say if, I say when they make a bitter root movie, you know, I want there to be more than one. You know, I want it to turn into a really good franchise that entertains people for a lot of years to come. And I know that there's some ways that are easier to do that than others.
Yeah. Well, I can say as a very big fan, I love the universe you've created with your coworkers on that, your fellow artists. It is just amazing. And I do want to, if you don't mind, if I can just fanboy on it a bit. We did introduce in that summer special the other groups of monster hunters of other ethnic enclaves in New York.
Yes.
The China, down in Chinatown, and it got me thinking about how ethnic enclaves, each ethnic enclave presumably has its own monster hunters, but how that separation possibly is sort of what it has led to this new monster invasion, that because people are broken off in their own separate cells, in their own separate groups, taking care of their own borders, if that is maybe how the monsters have gotten such a sprawling power set to launch their invasion.
That's a very interesting observation. And so what I will say is I just had this conversation with Chuck Brown last night. This is my co-writer, and we were talking about this, and we were talking about other families and the interaction of other families. And the key was what I said all along is I want people to know that there are other families, but I don't necessarily want to show those other families. I don't want to get too deep into them, because then that just becomes more characters that we have to deal with. And one of the things Chuck and I have been talking about is, well, why don't the other families work together? And what does it mean that they don't? And what does it mean, in one of the stories in the Red Summer special, we meet the Wiley, this woman, her name's Wiley Wu. And so we know her family is also does similar work. And then they mention a family up in Boston, and with and I made sure that that family in Boston had a really obviously Irish name, because Boston is has always been a very Irish heavy ethnic. There's a strong Irish presence in Boston, and so Chuck and I, it's one of those things where you come up with the idea, but then you're like, oh God, what are we going to do with this? How do we make sure it doesn't get out of hand? And so we're still figuring it out, because like there's a draft of issue 6, and again, this is all my fault, because I've been so swamped that the way Chuck and I write together, it's like, well, now it's my turn to massage issue 6, then I'll give it back to him, and then it goes to Sanford, and and there's a scene where you meet a whole bunch of families, and it's a great scene, but it takes up a lot of space, and I'm not convinced that as a team that we're prepared to really open up that can of worms that extensively. So it's one of those things you wrestle with a lot. A lot of times you have a really great idea, a really great scene. You can, maybe it's great 4 or 5 scenes that go into a story, and then you go, okay, wait a second, we can't really follow through on this, so maybe we shouldn't do this, or maybe we should scale it back, or maybe we should move it to later on in the story. And that's sort of where we're at right now.
Yes.
But yeah, you picked up on it. You picked up on what we were trying to do with that.
Well, good.
Little 6 page.
I'm a very good comic book reader. That's why I'm the professor. Along those same lines, I wanted to toss this little thing. Now, of course, we did get our big reveal with Naomi McDuffie.
Yep.
Her full origin is now played out to us. But there was this item. I noticed some people talking about it online. Is her sigil.
Okay.
And certain design elements that are reminiscent of both the Black Lantern and the White Lantern sigil as well.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, and you can say I can't comment on that right now. I'm curious if that is an intentional echoing of that symbology, or if it is just coincidental. Like the way that the Sentry and Ms. Marvel both have an S on their chest.
Yeah, the best of my knowledge, it was completely unintentional. I don't. I've talked to Jamal. He's never mentioned it. Brian and I have never talked about it. So I think it was just one of those coincidences. We talked about, we wanted some sort of symbolism of energy and light, and that if it was possible to radiate in a way that gave a sense of hope, which is how do you convey that, right? And so Jamal came back with some stuff, and as near as I can tell, it's all a coincidence. And that's the thing with comics a lot of times is you throw something together, and then it comes out, and then everybody in the comic book world is like, oh, this is what this is, and you're like, it is. I didn't mean for it to be that way, but yeah.
Although sometimes that can be a lot of fun for inspiration. I remember reading when David John Byrne came out with his Superman, and he was writing his little stories about his relationship with Superman in the back, and about how he didn't realize it was an S for most of his youth as a child, that he just thought it was two oddly shaped fish swimming past each other. Which I think kind of feeds into the idea that is now that's not an S. It's the symbol of hope, and that you're actually, that in Kryptonian you're actually supposed to look at the negative, not the positive image, or the positive image, not the negative image, depending on how you look at that. So I mean, it's something that's out there. You have life and death, light and darkness. Nice symbologies to have if you ever want to explore it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's funny because there's this relationship between Naomi and her best friend Annabelle. Now I can't remember the character's name, right? And there's some people that have read into it perhaps that they're in some sort of romantic relationship, and like that's a question that just keeps coming up all the time now. And hey, is Naomi, is she in a relationship with another woman? And I've never answered it, and I will never answer it. But I did ask Brian. I was like, hey, Brian, is this something that we're trying to do? And he just looked at me like, who cares? As long as we're having fun, let the readers read into it. And that's what I think. That's one of the things I really love about comics, is that once it's written and once it's drawn, once it's out there on the shelves, or you're reading it on your tablet or on your phone or whatever, it ceases to be just mine, or Naomi isn't just mine or Brian's or Jamal's or anybody else's. Now it belongs to you. Now it belongs to the readers, and each reader creates their own individual relationship, their own individual meaning. And nothing I can say or anyone else can say or do is necessarily going to take that meaning away. And I want to be very careful. That's why I'm not saying emphatically, no, her symbol is not this. Mm-hmm. Who knows what it is? I don't think it is. But
well, along those lines, has anyone ever came up with a theory about anything you've worked on where you're like, I never thought of that before, but that's a good idea, or you just always know this is my vision, I never stray from this? Or
I'm trying to think if there's ever been. I'm sure there has been that, and I'm just not thinking of it off the top of my head. There's always, a lot of times there's these little things that'll happen in a scene or in an overall issue, and people will, again, they'll read something into it and they'll be like, oh, I just love the way Hawkeye just really didn't care about anything in issue number 3 of Occupy Avengers. And you're like, and that's the reason I relate to Hawkeye, because he just doesn't care. And I was like, he doesn't care? Okay, yeah, that's whatever. So it's I'm sure that the moment we're done recording this episode, I will think of like 5 different examples, but a lot of times I do think about as I'm writing, I try to think about, okay, is this an opportunity for me and my artist, or me and my co-writer and my artist, to create something where the reader can bring their own thing to it, where they can bring their own interpretation to a nuanced look, or the response to a question. And to me, that's always been the fun part of comics. It's the voice of what a character sounds like in your head. It's reading an issue of Fantastic Four, and in your imagination, each one of those characters has a different voice. At least for me, each one had a different voice, and that's always the danger of bringing something to live action, or even just animation, where it's like, yeah, no, I'm sorry, that Ben Grimm doesn't sound like this, or whatever. And I try not to take that away from the reader, unless, if somebody came to me with something that was just completely off the wall and counterintuitive to maybe who I am as a person, some of my philosophies in storytelling, or how I interact with the rest of the human race, then I might go, nope, sorry, you're wrong on that one, but nothing that extreme has ever happened, at least not in my comics career. Probably other aspects of my life, but we're not talking about that.
Now, you recently had a really nice article that I really loved, where you were discussing the class you teach on comic book writing, and specifically about how when you're writing, often you'll have, like, you think you have 12 issues, and then suddenly someone comes up and says, no, you have 8. And how, you wind up having to, really compress the arc of my favorite character in the Marvel universe, the Deadly Nighthawk, Tilda Johnson, the Deadly Nighthawk. Marvel, why you were leaving that on the table is really, it boggles my mind. Yeah. So anyway, and so here's a question to you: what is more difficult for you as an artist when you have to compress a story because you thought you had 12 issues and now you have 8, or when you're making your own stories and you're kind of like, I have too many things to tell and I'm not, how do I compress myself?
Oh, that's a great question. It's different case by case, right? If you're working for a company like Marvel or DC, and you think you're writing something that's going to be 12 issues, and then you find out it's only going to be 6. That's really difficult, and that's really hard. Now, but the key is when did you find out? And if you find out, say, before issue 4 or 5 is in the can, or we'll say really before issue 3 is in the can, then you've got time to rework issues 4, 5, and 6 so that you have a complete story. That's my philosophy. Now, it might be a nightmare to do it, but you can do it. And so if you look at like Marvel stuff, and we could talk specifically Marvel, Nighthawk was supposed to be 12 issues, but it was canceled, and we were told it's only going to be 6. And it was canceled the week the first issue came out, and the artist was working on issue 3. Issues 4, I know issue 4 was written, and issue 5 and 6 had been plotted out, and issue 6 was ending on this note of, well, there's going to be an issue 7 through 12. So I knew immediately that I had to rewrite issue 6, but as I looked at it, I realized, well, I can also rewrite 4 and 5 because neither of these issues have been started yet. And so that was a bad scenario, but it was the best case of a bad scenario. Now with Occupy Avengers, when that was canceled, issue 7, I don't think issue 7 was out yet because it was canceled with issue 9. So it seems to me like I was working on issue 8, and then I found out, oh yeah, there's only going to be 2 more issues. And so the arc was the story that I was working on was supposed to be 8, 9, and 10. And suddenly it was just going to be 8 and 9. Mm-hmm. But now it was so we're losing a whole issue. So now I got to compress it. So that was one of the worst scenarios. It was just kind of heartbreaking because I had so much I wanted to do with my own character, with not my own characters, with the characters I'd come to love. Now, if it was my own book, then, something that's creator owned, like with Bitter Root, where there's stuff you suddenly realize, oh, we just got to cut this. There's no room for it. It's in the moment, it's painful. But what the most important thing is always, is it in service to the story? And so I say this all the time to Chuck and Sanford when we're working on Bitter Root. And then, Brian and I say this all the time because we have very similar philosophies. Is it serving the story? And it doesn't matter how much we love this scene. Is it serving the story? And if it's not serving the story, then it can go. The thing about comics is you're always limited by space. It's not like, even if you're publishing it yourself, there's still a certain amount of limitations. But if you're working for Marvel or DC, an issue is as many pages as it is. You get 20 to 22 pages. You can't just suddenly go, oh, well, this one's 27 pages. You got to, if you wrote a 27-page script, there's a script of Naomi. There was a couple issues that ran a little longer. I think there's a couple that are 24 pages, but there was one that was like 28 pages, and they were like, nope, 4 pages got to go. And I'm not going to say, oh, come on, give us 4 more pages, and to his credit, Brian didn't say it either, because we also knew that just meant 4 more pages that Jamal was going to have to draw. And we were on a really tight schedule. So, you make these decisions, and sometimes they pay off, and sometimes they're a little disheartening. But I think that, one of the things to keep in mind is that comics are, I mean, both of you have been reading comics for a long time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And as have I. Been reading comics for 40 something years, and there are a handful of stories that I really truly love that have stuck with me all these years. But for the most part, the comics and other forms of pop culture weren't necessarily meant to be read hundreds of times and studied over and over again. And I know this sounds like sacrilege to some people. And I'm saying that looking around I'm in my office, and it's filled with comics and bags and boards, right? But, when I was a kid growing up, like, you read a comic and that was it. Like, then you maybe traded it with a friend, maybe you never saw it again. And so it's funny because, like, sometimes I'll go back and especially if I'm working on a specific series, like right now, Bitter Root, I was like, God, I'm going to have to go back and read all 5 issues of Bitter Root just to make sure we're not repeating ourselves. And I'm reading those 5 issues, and I'm like, oh, hey, I don't remember this scene. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it's just kind of crazy, because it's like, I think there's a lot to be said for the story, whether it's a comic or a movie or something like that, living on in your memory and not necessarily revisiting it, or not revisiting it that often. And sometimes stuff is worth it. Sometimes you go back and you reread something and you're like, wow, this is absolutely amazing. And then there's other stuff you go back and look at and you're like, wow, yeah, okay, I love this when I was 12, but now it's not quite what I thought it was.
Well, I think you could say that. You could probably say that about any form of entertainment, even movies or TV shows. If you watch it enough, you're going to see the flaws in anything.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah, I often find I will go back and revisit some piece that I remember so vividly and love so well, and I realize I've completely recut that scene in my head to emphasize the part that I liked the best. And when I would see the original, I was like, oh, that was just a throwaway line. But to me, that was like the hub of the entire film.
Yes.
Oh, what I wanted to ask? I see that Naomi's going to be showing up in the pages of Young Justice soon. Is she going to be a permanent member, or is that just a guest starring role? Or
I'm guessing that she's going to be a permanent member. Brian, I've read a bunch of the scripts of stuff that where she's making appearances, and it's more like he shows it to me and says, okay, is there, am I taking her too far in one direction or another that you don't want to take her? And I'm like, nope, that's fine. Do whatever you want to do. And I'm looking forward to seeing the Young Justice stuff. And as far as I know, she's going to be a regular member. And I haven't had a conversation with Brian in like a week or two, so it's not like it's that long. And I just told him last time I saw him was when you're ready to start working on the second arc, Naomi, or second season or whatever you want to call it, just give me a call. We'll sit down. We'll map it all out. But until then, just do whatever you want with her. And I put in one request for one thing that I wanted to see happen. I don't know if he did it or not. But I don't know if he's going to do it or not, but everything I've read has been really fun, and I look forward to reading it. And that's the thing, I mean, I just love working with him. I love the opportunity to work with him. He's an old friend of mine, and it's interesting reading it because, and it's the same way with Bitter Root, where, a month or two after an issue, after you've written it, and then it's drawn, and then it comes out, I can't remember who wrote what. Once in a while, they'll be like, oh, yeah, that was my joke. And you feel really good about it, Mm-hmm. But for the most part, it's like, like with Bitter Root, I can tell you that with most of Berg's dialogue, the way we handle it is that we write just the basic meaning of what we want Berg to say. And then, Chuck and I both sort of go off in our own directions and try to find the biggest words that we possibly can. We're breaking out our thesaurus. But I would say Chuck has probably written 75 to 85% of Berg's dialogue as it appears in the comic. And so my thing is I try to find words that Chuck has no idea what they mean. And then I'm like, here, I topped you. I'm not writing as much as you are of this character, but I'm writing the words that people really have to go to the dictionary to look up. So, but that's part of the fun of it and it's even more, I find it, I can't speak for anyone else who co-writes comics. I find it more fun the further you get from the book when you really can't remember, did I write this line? Did I write that line? It was when Brian and I were first developing Naomi, and there's a character in the book D, and spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read the book, we knew that D had a deep, dark secret in his past, and we spent months figuring out, okay, where is D from? Is he going to be, is he a new god? Is he from Fourth World? Is he from Vanguard? Is he from Ron? Where is he going to be from? And we had this long list of all these possibilities of the things that we could do. And we were getting down to the wire. I think it was in issue 2 or 3 where we revealed it. And Brian was just like, he's like, look, man, we just got to decide. And he goes, whatever you want to do, just do it. And I was like, okay, he's from Thanagar, and we've never seen these elite forces before. These are like their black ops, these are the Black Hawks of Hawk World, and he was like, what? And I was explaining it to him and acting it out in his living room, and he's like, that's great. And and then he built on it from there. There was all this other stuff that I had written a scene that revealed the sort of secret history of D, and handed it to him, and then he changed it and made it even better, and then I changed some stuff, and it's great. I love that, and I love that people can't, for the most part, people can't tell what. I actually had a friend come up to me at San Diego and said, okay, so who's actually writing Naomi? Is it you or Bendis? Because I can't tell. And I said, well, what do you mean you can't tell? And they said, well, it doesn't read exactly like your stories, and it doesn't read exactly like his. And I was like, perfect.
True collaboration.
Yep.
You know what I wanted
And then
to...
back.
It's okay. I know what I wanted to ask you is Charlie and I were talking 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago about maybe a possible return of the speculators market on comics because, like, what is it? Issue 1 of Naomi is like really skyrocketed. Do you think that? Do you think that's people thinking, oh, David and Brian are creating like the next Jessica Jones or Captain Marvel? She's going to make the jump to the either a movie or a TV show eventually, and this comic's going to be worth so much money.
I guess that must be it. I think there's a sort of serendipity to it as well, because you got to remember that this came out, the first issue of Naomi came out just after Into the Spider-Verse. And people went nuts over that. And there was a lot of people outside of your standard comic readers who were really discovering Miles Morales for the first time.
Yes.
And I think that sort of fed into it. But yeah, that speculator thing is kind of crazy. I mean, I had a friend call me, and he was at his local comic shop, and they were charging $150 for Naomi #1, and he was like, "Aren't you excited?" And I was like, "No, because I'm not getting any of that money.
Uh-huh.
If I got some of that $150, I'd be happy." But as a kid who grew up loving comics in the 70s and 80s, and collecting X-Men in the 80s, and I remember paying $50 some odd for Giant Size X-Men #1. I was in 8th grade, and actually I didn't pay for it. That was my birthday present when I was in 8th grade. My mom said, "You can get anything you want." I said, "I want this comic." And she was like, "You want a $55 comic book?" And I was like, "Yep." And now it's like, you can get that. You can get a reprint of that for a couple bucks.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe comics are meant to be read. Maybe they're meant to be read only once or twice, and then you throw them in a box, or you give them to somebody, you recycle them, you do whatever you want. But that whole thought of, especially in this day and age, that people are paying a ton of money for a comic, if you're going to spend $150 on Naomi #1, I'll be 100% honest. I would rather you spend $150 buying a bunch of other comics and reading those comics and sharing them with people, as opposed to, putting them in a box and hoping that someday it's going to pay for your kid's college education. I just don't.
I mean, that's a good message. Yes, spread that money around. The comic book industry could need it.
Yeah.
Now, just out of curiosity, do you have time to read very many comics in our current market?
I haven't been reading much these days, and part of that is just because I'm trapped in this assignment that's really kicking my butt, and so I'm way behind. I've got a stack of trade paperbacks, of fairly recent stuff like Middle West, which is Scotty Young and Jorge Corona. Like, that's in my pile. Bully Wars, because I saw Scotty Young recently, and I was just like, man, this transition that he's made from artist to artist writer and writing stuff is so impressive. Man Eaters, Chelsea Kane's book Man Eaters, that's in my pile. So there's a bunch of stuff that is sitting around. Even I still haven't read Black Monday Murders yet, and I pulled it off the shelf the other day and moved it to the top of my pile. And that book's like, what, 4 years old or something? So I'm way behind. There's a couple things I've read. I've read the first issue of Jimmy Olsen, because I loved what Matt did with Hawkeye, and I love Sex Criminals, and Steve Lieber is one of my favorite artists. So that was actually the first issue of Jimmy Olsen was the first comic book, I would say, in like 5 or 6 months that I bought the day it came out and read it that night. So I'm pathetic. I apologize.
No, trust me. I actually talk about comic books all the time as my as my avocation, not my vocation. But
Yeah.
you know, I still have books that I buy them and I never get around to reading them. It's so I feel you. And I'm not even doing anything worthwhile when I'm not reading comics. That's the sad thing. You're at least creating amazing stories.
I did read, interestingly, the other night. Because I literally have a pile of books, of both, trade paperback / graphic novels, individual floppies, and then regular books. I pulled My Friend Dahmer off the to be read pile the other night and just sat down and read the whole thing, and was like, wow, this is a really good book. My girlfriend has read it, and so she's talked about it, and I was like, okay, it'll give us something to talk about. So I read that, and then I was actually thinking about finishing. I never finished reading all of 100 Bullets. I read probably the first 4 or 5 trade collections, and then stopped. And then I was like, well, maybe I should read that. And then I was like, well, you'd have to start over from the very beginning. And so I pulled volume 1 of 100 Bullets off the bookshelf and put that in the to be read pile, because God forbid I should ever shrink that pile down. I'll always add stuff to it.
So you're not reading Superman or the Leviathan stuff by that Bendis guy?
Not yet. I do have the trades of both Action and Superman, and I actually did read probably the first 5, probably the equivalent to the first trades as they were coming out. Just because I was so excited for Brian. But I am behind schedule on that. I read the first couple issues of Wonder Twins because I really like what Mark Russell's doing. But reading monthly books, I tend to be more of a binge reader these days. I would much rather sit down over the course of maybe a day or 2 days and read an entire trade than, I read Event Leviathan #1 this month, and then I read whatever else, 3 other monthly books, and then a month later, I don't remember what happened in those, it's, I'm terrible at that. So
here's the question. You cannot answer this. Do you have a theory of who Leviathan is? Do you know who Leviathan is?
I do not know.
Okay.
I do not know. And just like years ago when Brian was still writing at Marvel, when he was writing Secret Invasion, I didn't know who all the Skrulls were either. So yeah, and you know what? To me, that ruins the fun. I'm not one of those people. I don't read reviews as much as I used to because too many critics put too many spoilers in there, and so I'm really good at avoiding the sort of things that will give away the fun parts. And so yeah, I don't know who Leviathan is, and I'll find out when the time is right.
Yeah, me and Phil both have theories.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he thinks it's Jimmy Olsen. I think it's Gus Gorman.
Okay.
I think it's time to introduce Gus Gorman to the comic books from Superman 3, Richard Pryor's character. The best of the Superman films, Superman 3, in my opinion. But
if it's not Gus, maybe that's the series I should pitch over at DC. Maybe that's what
Gus Gorman?
Yeah.
I tell you, Gus Gorman is such an amazing character. You don't want to get me started on Gus Gorman. He is a brilliant hacker. In this day and age, there's not this super genius hacker information broker for the villains out there in the DC universe. It just boggles my mind.
Oh, David just wants the excuse to go through all the Richard Pryor works, to get the voice for the character.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's also fun too. And Richard Pryor.
Well, I'm always looking for really weird characters to try to bring back and do something with, and that's one I like. I wonder who has the rights to that character.
I'll tell you right now, David, that is yours for free. Golden Globus. I mean, I'm sure Warner was a producer on it, so they got to have some sort of rights to it. You know.
Yeah. No, I'll All right. Well, now you put that one in my head.
Sorry, David. I don't mean to put more stuff on your plate.
That's okay, because I'll tell you that the crazy one. I had a this is the funniest thing. A couple weeks back, Brian posted something on. It was probably on Instagram or something, and it probably had something to do with either Young Justice or whatever. I can't remember, but in the image, Captain Carrot was in it, from Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew. And 2 nights before, I had a dream that I was writing Captain Carrot. And so, of course, now I'm reading all the symbolism into it. Here I have this dream. A couple days later, one of my best friends posts this thing, and so I call him up, and I was like, Brian, man, who's writing Captain Carrot? He's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, Captain Carrot was in that image. And he's like, yeah, he was in the image. There's not going to be a Captain Carrot comic. I was like, I gotta write this book. I gotta write, because this is how nutty I get. And he was like, please don't waste your time writing Captain Carrot. So we'll see. But now the thing would be to bring Gus Gorman into Captain Carrot's story.
Well, there you go.
I don't know how to do it, but you never know.
Oh, and
if anyone could, you could.
I was gonna say, David, before we go, can you forward a message to Mr. Bendis for me? I mean, it's easier to get a hold of the Pope than Brian Michael Bendis. I mean, I'm loving his Superman stuff. I'm really loving the Event Leviathan stuff, but like, I am much more interested. Are they going to give him like a monthly shot at Batman event at some point here?
I'll talk to him about it. I think he's doing that. Batman, it was part of
the Batman universe. Yeah,
and he's been having so much fun with that it's kind of ridiculous. It kind of makes me angry how much fun he's having. And
well, that's what sparked that, because I've been reading that, and like after I've read his Daredevil and his Jessica Jones, and even the Miles Morales stuff. I'm like, oh, why haven't they given him even on Detective Comics something?
I think, and I don't want to answer anything specifically for him. I think one of the reasons he didn't initially gravitate towards Batman, because I think a lot of people were expecting that from him.
He wanted something different.
And I think, and so, but he's having so much fun, and he's working with Nick Darrington, and I read the first couple chapters of that, and then I was like, okay, I'm just gonna wait till it's all collected. But I love the art, and so I'll ask him about that. I'll ask him as soon as I ask him about Gus Gorman, and you know what? You're laughing now, but I'm sitting here searching for Gus Gorman images, so I'm going to post some stuff in the next on social media within the next hour or two, imploring people that they that DC hire me. And it looks like he actually did appear in some sort. Oh, this just might be the actual like adaptation of the comic though, or some of the movie. I don't know, but yep, this is what I want to do.
All I ask is, you mentioned that you were talking to us on Capes and Lunatics, and now you have an idea for a Gus Gorman story.
There you go. I think I can do that.
Yay! Thank you, David.
Thank you.
You're always such a pleasure to talk to. Let's not make it 2 years next time.
All right.
Because honestly, I could talk to you all day. I want to go to wherever you are and be your actual friend in real life. But
it's very anticlimactic. I'll tell you that much for sure.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, so am I. So, anything you want to say before you head out of here, David?
Yeah, plug your work. Whatever.
Well, thanks for having me, and just keep an eye open. We've got in next year there's going to be the new Naomi arc is going to start, the new Bitterroot arc is going to start, and there's going to be more stuff from Solid Comics, and that's really exciting stuff. I'm moving more towards more indie stuff, more creator-owned stuff. That's where I'm finding a true passion for, and that's what I want to work on as much as possible. So I'm just going to keep plugging away, and hopefully people will will just kind of come and hang out for the ride, I guess.
I'm there.
David Walker, the next Robert Kirkman. Mark my words.
All right. Or just the next David Walker. I'd be happy.
Oh yeah, but I'm just saying, they're going to make something a TV show, and you're going to get all the money.
Yeah. We'll see.
Good night, David.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much.
Yep. Take care.
You too. Okay, Philip, let's give our social medias.
All righty. Yeah, me first.
Oh, well, yeah, because
this
is
is
my show.
I know, yeah. It's just so weird. I can't not see it, not being able to see her pretty face for once.
Yeah, I keep on making thumbs ups at the cameras.
I was shaking my head when he was making points, and I'm like, neither one of them can see me. Why am I shaking my head? All I can see myself on the screen. That's it. Yeah. If anyone wants to get a hold of me, especially any comic creators like the great David Walker, if you want to do an interview, email me nightwingpdp@gmail.com. On Twitter, I am at nightwingpdp, and just look for the Capes and Lunatics and Superconnectivity on all social media.
And, of course, if you'd like to write to me in an old-fashioned email way, there where Ma's and Pa's once did, do so at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog, all one word, @gmail.com. And, of course, follow me on Twitter as I live tweet Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for one more season, and The Orville, which will no longer be on broadcast, and many other shows that I love, at Charlie Esser. That's CHARLIE. ESSER. Look for the 2 E's in the middle.
For quality. Bing!
Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for super connecting with us once more this week. Be certain to be back here, same bat time, same bat channel, to super connect with us once again. Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, technically, we're a podcast.